Welcome to our fourth Enhancing Online Learning lunch session. Today's presentation will be presented by our colleague Navjot, or Zoe, who you'll know is the course coordinator for the Graduate Diploma and Graduate Certificate in Nursing, and is an excellent colleague.
Thanks, Dr. Shashi, especially for giving me the opportunity to discuss a topic that is very close to my heart. And for David as well for the wonderful introduction, especially the great colleague thing. Yeah, that touched me. Okay, so let's get started. So as we know, we are here together today over Connect and Share over lunch session. It is a very informal discussion. However, I've tried to keep the facts correct in there because I know you might be referring back to this presentation in future in order to seek assistance for developing assessment tasks for future. So the main purpose of choosing this topic of discussion today is something that we're actually using at the moment, something we're using and finding challenging to implement. So I just wanted a bit of a reassurance so that I can go back and read and see if other people had same issues as we have in IHNA, especially from the time when we moved entirely for online teaching. We have been doing online teaching for a specific cohort, specific group of students. However, I did not personally know much about that particular group because I wasn't involved in coordinating with that group. But since March this year, I have been directly involved in these interactions, these student interactions, and working around designing plans and also involved in curriculum development. So that's where I got my first exposure to online learning as my first-hand exposure, and that's why I wanted to know more and more about it so that I can have proper implementation of these plans for my student success. So that's the reason we are talking about this topic today. The topic for today is designing online assessment tasks. Why is it a topic in itself? Is it any different from designing other tasks we do in face-to-face classroom deliveries? And how is the difference? That's what we're going to look at. But before I proceed on to the main topic for today, sorry, my slideshow has just stuck. Let's see. Lovely, let's go back. So before we proceed on to that, I would like to acknowledge the country. I would begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting today. I would also like to pay my respects to elders past and present. I also pay respects to the countries where you come from. The topics of discussion for today will be teaching and assessment in an online learning environment. So just getting a background of how it happened and where are we at in this timeline. Next topic will be designing authentic assessments for online delivery and why it has to be specifically designed, as I previously said. Why are there differences of assessments when we do them face-to-face versus when they are changed to online delivery? So yes, most of institutes have moved their course material from what they were doing face-to-face into online. But let's see what are the pitfalls in that. And at the end, we'll be talking about designing an assessment rubric. Not much talking, but reflecting upon what we already know. If you're happy, can I continue with the presentation? Everyone can hear me? Beautiful. Okay.
Yes, sure.
Thank you. Wonderful. Looking at the main topic, teaching assessment in an online learning environment. So what I have read through in this one is, so I'm just going to make it more visible. Lovely. So there's a report on TechSA website in good practice in online learning from Dr. Lynn Martin. And the report says that majority of the institutes, the courses, the units that they were previously teaching face-to-face, they were just rapidly converted to online delivery. We know with all the restrictions coming around from the Commonwealth government, from the local governments around, we can't have students in campus. So all the institutes were rushed to just change what they had to fit in the online delivery form. And that's something that went wrong straight away with that first step. Because of the urgency of getting this new mode of delivery up and running, the teaching and learning materials were quickly devised or translated from materials used in teaching face-to-face instead of being developed by online learning experts. And that is something that we personally feel at IHNA as well. However, we had the additional advantage that we were already running this course for a specific cohort in the online mode. So we did have previous exposure. We did have a bit of understanding on how things work on an online learning platform. And that's why it could have been a bit easier for us to translate that for all the campuses throughout IHN. So that's what gives you reassurance that it's not just us. Majority of the institutes had to go through the same process of rapidly converting to online instead of seeking online learning experts' assistance. Moving on to higher education standards framework and what does it has to say about that transition from face-to-face to learning. However, let's see that we are just talking about teaching and learning resources at the moment. So what they're saying is that if the subjects in the course are identified to be taught online, so when we are applying for accreditation or registration, when I say we are higher education institutes, when we apply for accreditation for such courses that we aim to teach online, there's specific evidence that we have to provide in order to ensure that we demonstrate the degree of cohesion. Degree of cohesion in the approaches of teaching and assessments of the subjects or the units we are teaching, the technology resources that we will be teaching and how they will be shared with our students, and also the staff skill. Are the staff of that higher education institute who will be teaching the students in this online delivery mode, are they skilled enough to undertake this task? The level of support provided to online students has to be evident as well. What additional support are you going to provide to an online student versus a face-to-face student? And also note that in this particular point, there will be additional support when it comes to international online students. So we have guidelines on how to support international online students as well. So we have to be mindful about that, especially when an institute like IHN has a big number of students from overseas. And also we have to clearly demonstrate what are the expectations from student. What is the need for student engagement in their learning? What are the institutional expectations of students' attendance or participation in online activities? So this is what has to be evident in our plan even before we deliver the course. Are we clear on these points, everyone? Am I still making sense?
Yes, yes.
Beautiful. Thank you. So we're still continuing on the same report by Dr. Lynn Martin, submitted to TEXA. So now we're looking at, there are a few points that we need to consider for this transition to make sure that this transition is smooth enough, is successful enough. So these points say the existing subject in the course learning outcomes. What is the unit we are going to teach online and what are the course learning outcomes? Because I might have to go back and revise them to adapt them to the online delivery mode. Second point is the nature of the assessment used. What sort of assessments are we going to use when we offer the course in an online delivery mode? And why we want to do that? We want to do that to warrant that we are still attaining the learning outcomes that we initially intended to attain. Because in some cases, we might have to change it. And those some cases could be the programs which lead to registration, programs which have a practical component. So that's where they might to go back and revise their learning outcomes as well. And that, of course, after consultation with TEXA. And also looking at what is the teaching and support that we will be providing to our students when we are moving them online. So these are the key points that we have to remember when we are looking forward to this transition. Based on the recommendations from that report submitted to TEXA, I have gathered a few toolkit solutions, things that we can implement in our institute. A lot of this, and we are lucky, we are following those, but there are a few things that we can easily adapt to as well. So the first point in the toolkit is constructive alignment. As we know, this is the key for successful curriculum development, and this is what is applicable here as well. So what we're saying in constructive alignment during this transition from face-to-face to learning, that our adjustments that we are making to these learning outcomes are still appropriate, are still following that alignment, are still embedded in the course plan. The level of attainment expected for the new assessment task must be similar. So going back to what we want to achieve out of assessment task, am I looking at assessing students on recalling, am I assessing them on critical thinking skills? So the level of attainment has to correspond to the original subject we are teaching. So that's where we have to be extra cautious when we are designing these new assessment tasks. So that was about constructive alignment. Next point is formative assessments and how do we provide feedback to students. And in this particular point, I would like to add a couple of things. So for formative assessment, TEXA is ensuring that all the units are taught in a format where we have formative assessments and they lead to summative assessments. And I have to have a clear feedback loop. And I'm sorry, I'm guilty of using the word I, but when I'm saying I, that means as an institute, that's what we have to do. So as an academic, I can say. So I need to ensure there is this loop, there's feedback loop that ensures my students get timely feedback, they get individual feedback, and they get the outcomes of their formative assessment tasks so that they can write their summative papers better. And just recently, I have attended one of the sessions with peer review portal, and that's what they were saying. There was an academic mentioning feedback and feed forward approach as well, that I personally find very, very useful. Another suggestion here is ensure when we are giving feedback to our students on an online platform, and there are certain key points that we can consider. First of all is when you're writing a feedback, mention that this is a feedback. So try and use the word feedback in that comment so that students get a clear idea of that comment to be the feedback for their paper. It's just not a comment, it is a feedback on your paper. So of course, the same sandwich approach as we talk about, thanks for the submission, but they said you have to personalize. So I think most of us are guilty of using the word dear student, but what they're recommending is to say dear ABC. So specify it, make it personalized to the student you're talking to so that they feel connected. Another thing I have recently understood about feedback and communication with our students, because as you know, as most of the universities started this online delivery back in March, so we have got I should say around 6 months of time to analyze how we all going. And that analysis itself is giving some conclusions like, some of the students are finding it easier through an online delivery mode, because when for example, just here in our setup today, when you listen to me, you have my face right in front of the screen and you're listening to me. And it seems more personal than you're sitting in a group of 50 people and I'm standing there and speaking against a PowerPoint. You know what I mean? So I think we all personally feel that as well, that there is a personal component when it comes to having online interactions through Zooms or Teams. And that is an advantage on our side as well, that we and our students build an initial rapport, and that in turn helps us to be transparent with this feedback for our students, which in turn can deliver good results for us. So that's what we have to say about formative assessments and how we can plan it, that it's easier to handle online. And they're saying you can have more and more of automated assessment tasks, such as short quizzes and tests. And in upcoming slides, we'll be talking about how to authenticate these as well, because they are very easier to handle as compared to other written submissions. Moving on to the next point in our toolkit, it is assessment and teaching of generic skills. As we all are familiar that unit learning outcomes or course learning outcomes might have certain generic skills as well, such as critical thinking or independent intellectual inquiry. Other attributes include collaboration, teamwork, flexibility, and communication. This is often assessed in a classroom environment when we are giving them group tutorial activities, or sometimes we tend to demonstrate that in a classroom environment. So I model that behavior so that my students can copy that, to develop from that. We can easily replace these generic skills through our online interactions via Zoom or Teams. So that's where we don't have to worry about missing out on these generic skills. They still continue to be used in online interaction environment as well. Second point is support academic interactions between students outside of formal teaching. So apart from the tutorial session environment, we are establishing, as most of the other institutes are, establishing chat rooms or teams or use of social media for students to discuss such issues arising from academic studies. Because here, remember, we are missing out that peer interaction. So that is one of the drawbacks of online interaction. And that's what we want to try and address today, is to build is to bridge that gap of peer interaction by creating these platforms where students can go and interact outside the class hours and have that peer interaction to keep them supported. Another important point here to discuss is student safety and well-being. So that's what we are doing here in IHNA as well, ensuring that our academic support team is in touch with our students throughout their course, again, to the point where they feel supported, where they feel safe, and we ensure that our students are receiving all the possible support. And that's where they get the opportunity to discuss any personal issues that we have. So last 3 points for the toolkit that we can take home today is staff skills and staff development. And we are all aware that in IHNA as well, we are working on improving our staff skills, and we are currently developing, and we have already circulated a staff development register as well. So this is what we're working at, trying to adapt to this transition a bit better. Then comes to access to learning support services, and that's where we want transparency. We want access to all students across the globe so that they know where they can go and seek for learning support services. So that's where we have Teams page in IHNA. That's where we have Teams calls for our students. That's where we have academic support teams doing additional sessions with our students in order to provide them these support services. And the most important point here is to maintain academic integrity. So throughout all these procedures that I mentioned in the toolkit, we need to ensure that we're still following the principles of academic integrity. And this is something, this topic, I believe, has previously been covered in the second last presentation we had in this teaching group. So these things have been previously covered, and you can always go back. The recordings are available already for the first 2 sessions. I've seen them myself. You can always go back and refer to those. And that's primarily around academic integrity, especially in an online learning environment. So we are done with the toolkit. So far, we were just looking at how are we managing the teaching and learning experience in an online setting. So now let's move on to a very specific topic that corresponds to our topic today, tips for moving assessments online. So we have talked about, okay, I have moved my course material online. What's next? Probably now we should sit down and look at moving our assessments online. And there are a few points on how we can do that. So all the take-home exams can be easily transferred online. So things that students were already doing at home when they were in a face-to-face delivery platform, they don't need change. We all know that. What else needs change? Essays. So if we were doing essays in the class, we have to accommodate them for online learning. How can we do that? We can shift the focus from focused analysis and application to demonstration of a research-based approach, where we can add a process how you did it, or we can add the reflective component that can help with this adjustment. And note that doing this reflection part there avoids issues with academic integrity as well. So less likely someone else is going to write a reflection for them. Less likely they will be buying assessments which are sold in bulk. So this is a way for us to ensure we are avoiding contract cheating and other issues around academic integrity. If keeping a scheduled online task with timed release, we again can add reflective components to help avoid cheating. Example, students to upload videos explaining their answers and grade these. So we grade those videos. How did you come to this conclusion? So they do a recording. Ask students to reflect on an online discussion that has been covered exclusively in the class. So that's where the students who attended the class would be the ones who would be able to write that reflection as well. And personally, I'm using these activities in the discussion board in Canvas, and I'm very pleased with the participation that I get from the students. And that also gives them an opportunity, especially for students who do not have any obligations around attendance, to go back on their non-teaching days, non-class days. They go back and they still continue to learn. They still continue to stay in touch. And also it provides me an opportunity to stay in touch with my students throughout the week. And I tell them that I will be looking at discussion board activities weekly or twice a week, so that's my negotiation with the group of students. So that is about adding discussions and what are the ways we can improve the assessment task, especially for online delivery. If able to resource an online Viva format using Zoom or Collaborate may work, where students are asked questions and respond on the spot. So again, for certain type of courses, and remember, we're not just talking about GC and GD in here, we're talking about a big variety of courses here. So that's where if you have to do a Viva, go ahead, you can do that on Zoom, you can do that on Collaborate, where you can see the students face-to-face. So these were the few tips for moving assessments online. We'll go into the details in the next topic as well. Okay, so they're saying, so I've just adopted this image from one of the reports from Deakin University, and they've given us some ideas on how to design an assessment task specifically for online and some pros and cons for each. So they're saying redesign an explanation-based question and release it as a scheduled online task with time to release. So that is a feature that Canvas offers us already. You can set up time, you can set it at as students' to-do list and set up a time as well. But the thing is, there are pros for this as well. It keeps the same question topics and it can test deeper understanding. What is the problem here? Marking more significant, reduced breadth of exam. Assessment security concerns may persist because still someone else can write it for them. But then we have solutions for those issues as well that we'll discuss later. Also, they're saying you can break down the whole exam into portfolio or series of tasks. You can do step A, B, C, and that is an approach that we already adopted this teaching term in ePortfolio unit. So kudos to Devita for adopting this approach where the student who's doing step 1 can only do step 2. So this is how we've tried to incorporate that in IHNA as well. Reformat the exam into a series of non-graded quizzes on the LMS. And for us, the LMS is Canvas. The final schedule online task with time release, again, asking students to attend the quizzes. And of course, you can use Proctorio and other platforms as well to assess their academic integrity on that side as well. But you will be surprised with the recent report on how did most of the universities feel about using platforms like Proctorio. So they're saying around 65% of the universities in Australia didn't even use that because they didn't see the point of using it. Because I think there's so much you can do with the task itself that you might end up designing something that doesn't need to be closely monitored. So that's where you might not need Proctorio. But again, that's another discussion for some other day. Again, writing the new tasks. So tasks that talk about in-depth discussion, tasks which involve scenarios that integrate knowledge, recall with creative, in-depth solutions, and or integrate local and current information. And also we already talked about video formatting. We talked about adding the reflection component as well. So these are the little tricks we can adopt in order to meet the online learning platform. Are we doing okay so far? Everyone's still connected, still understanding what I'm saying?
We are, yes.
Yes, Zoe.
Raised some interesting questions that we'll discuss soon. Yes.
Sure. Yeah, sometimes that dead silence is scary. So that's why I was like, is everyone awake? Are we on the right track?
Oh, sorry about that.
No, that's fine.
No, we just muted to avoid the interruption, Zoe.
Lovely. You're too good with this online learning, aren't we? Good. Thank you for that. Moving on to authentication processes for online assessments. Okay, so we talked about how we can change assessments that we did face-to-face to adapt to online, but then looking at who's writing these online assessments, so the authentication. And for this one, there are steps that we can take at individual levels. So things that an institute has to do, things that the management has to do, things that a student has to do, things that assessor has to do. And we'll look at that very soon. So commonly used online assessment tasks that contribute towards the assessment, there could be end of course examinations, there could be extended writing forms of essays or projects, portfolios of evidence of learning, tasks, teamwork or quizzes, reflective writing in blogs, and chat room contributions. So there are multiple ways where you can still be able to contribute towards assessment. I know there's a whole new discussion on how do you assess chat room contributions, like what is the assessment guideline on that? But again, you remember everything has a solution. So there are plans, there are guidelines how to assess that as well. Let's look at this report from a professor from Flinders University, submitted to Texa, and hopefully this link will work. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm just going to have to do a new share. And here in this particular document, we are just looking at a table that gives us a brief of how individual tasks can be monitored and how different people have different responsibilities around that. Okay, so I believe you can all see my screen. I'm sharing a Texa document here.
Yes.
Beautiful, thank you
Yep.
for confirming. So just talking about the different tasks, how you can ensure there's authentication, what are the implications for a higher education institute, and some comments, some limitations as well. Okay, examinations. How are you going to run examination in an online mode? So you can have unique identity codes, UICs, assigned to students' application to sit exam. So students have to log in with this number to get into exam. And this will be only available to the student. So each student has a unique identity code that they need to present before they can sit an exam. Okay, successfully answer online challenge questions prior to commencing exam. And same way, as other websites do, a set of 3 personal questions before you can jump in. Similar to that is what they're reflecting here. Exam proctors or invigilators use webcams and photographs to verify students sitting in the exam, or you can just move on to open book exams, proctors, and webcam recording of student examination. The few implications for the institute as well, we like letting the students and staff know to have a policy around unique identity code, and that is something we can discuss at the end of the session today on how we can bring this to our institute, and if we already have one. Okay, and here, most interesting fact here is that despite of putting all these authentication measures in place, you might have students who are willing to sacrifice their security. They might still want to go ahead and share their code with someone else or share the answers for those personal questions with someone else. And again, the whole infrastructure around setting up these things is pricey. Okay. Good students do well, underprepared students fail to use exam time effectively. And that is something we're already aware of. Essays as well. So let's look at the key examination tasks that we're already using in IHNA. So we can look at essays and portfolios. So essays, we can do a stage submission. So we said we'll do it in stages, stage 1, 2, 3. We break down the essay task instead of just submitting a 2,500 word essay at the end of the term. We break it down into smaller assessment tasks and ensure students are actively engaged. Okay, again, we have to be mindful that are they appropriate for the course we are offering, and could there be more authentic tasks that can be given? Brief writing exercise. This is something that is my personal favorite, and I believe I'm going to propose this in Learning and Teaching Committee to just get a heads up if I can go ahead with this. Often we see in challenging situations where it's hard for us to justify use of an external person to write your paper for contract cheating, this can be helpful. So they're asking us at the start of the term, engage your students in writing a brief exercise, a quick writing exercise for a baseline. You know what I mean? So we have a baseline writing done by the student in the class with me in the session online, sitting in front of me, submitting it before the tutorial ends. And that's why I can go back and look at this in case I have doubts about students' writing submitted in future. So this is something that I believe we can easily incorporate, especially when we have students all over the globe. It can be challenging at times trying to ensure academic integrity.
That's interesting, Zoe, you brought up that point. We have used the same example for a couple of our GDN groups in North Melbourne. Yeah, especially for C1, if I'm correct. Lectures did ask students to write something to address the same issue. So then we have something to compare, what they have written in classroom. And when we have any kind of doubt, so we can always go back and refer. So we have, that's good that you brought up because we practiced it in a couple of groups actually. This
lovely
work, yeah.
Really good to hear that, yeah. And I believe that would have been successful. And yeah, if I get the approval, then we can easily use it across campuses and see, if that is too good. Okay, different projects as well. We can again do a stage submission for those projects. Portfolios, So we can have 200, 300 word commentary against each learning outcomes in which students describe, they tell us why that particular task or learning activity they have undertaken, how is it going to help them to achieve the learning outcome for that particular unit. So this is what we're looking at here. Same with teamwork, assign your students in teams, give them a project to work on, present a PowerPoint, and share it with the rest of the class and the teachers as well. So again, the prime principle behind creating this assessment task is to break it down. Break it down where students feel they can do it, because the moment they feel they can't do it, that's where they go out and seek for external help. That's what we're trying to ensure. We provide them good support services. We provide them tasks which is doable, which sounds doable, and the students know how to do it with clear assessment guidelines. And that's where we can minimize issues around academic integrity. So I believe that's enough for us to understand. And again, for any resources that I'm sharing today in this PowerPoint, I'm more than happy for us to have a look at that. So please drop a message to me and I can share my PowerPoint slides with you. Let's go back to our original PowerPoint and move on to the next topic. Just checking, David, are we going all right with the time?
How long have we been going? Hang on, can't see.
It's already
almost
half an hour. So I think
Soon.
we probably want to limit it to probably another couple of minutes of talking, if that's okay.
Sure. We can do that. Thank you for that.
That's okay.
All righty. So bringing down to the last topic of discussion for us anyways, this is designing the assessment rubric. And I believe as academics sitting in the session today, we already understand the different taxonomies that we use in preparing these rubrics.
Like Bloom.
But I just want, that's right, Blooms, or there's so many out there.
There are bigs as well.
Yes, bills and bells as well. So there are quite a few types of. I do not know. No, that's right. So what we're looking at designing assessment rubrics, which in turn help our students, which in turn make them feel supported, make them feel prepared, and minimize issues around academic integrity as well. But here we are looking at how the knowledge that you have around the taxonomies used in preparing rubrics prepare you as an academic for online learning environment. Do you think you have to adapt to those taxonomies when you're looking at creating rubric for an online assessment task? So that is a homework, reflection for us to look at how these taxonomies impact how I create rubrics for online learning environment. So that's where I finished the topic for today, and there's additional reading as well that you can all refer to. Thank you, and now the platform is open for discussion.
And a very interesting discussion ensued, which is why I invite you, dear colleagues, to join us live at our next brown bag lunch session. You can bring something to eat. It's very casual, very relaxed. Please come along and speak with your colleagues about these interesting presentations we've been having. Thank you.